Okay, so we might kick off. I think a lot of people have joined now. First of all, my name is Eddie Goodwin from Enterprise Ireland. On behalf of my colleagues, in particular Patrick Stolzner and Roisin Greening, who were very much involved in helping me pull this together, we're delighted to welcome everyone and all the client companies that have joined us here today. There's a lot of familiar names and a lot of numbers. Over 60 have registered for this, so delighted to see so much interest in it. This is the first webinar that we put out from Germany. It's obviously about the response to what's going on at the moment in terms of the challenges of the Covid-19 crisis. So it's going to be the first of a series of 4 webinars that are taking place in the month of April. And the idea being behind that the German offices of Enterprise Ireland, both Munich and Dusseldorf, to try and help you safeguard your business, existing business out here in the German market, and to help you continue to try and win new business during this testing and unusual period. So there'll be 4 different themes over the month. We'll share those with you and let you know about them in plenty of time beforehand. So as I say, delighted to have you all, and you're all very welcome here today. So the one message I'd like to give to you, if you don't know already, Enterprise Ireland, in Germany, we're still very much open for business. And obviously the events that we had planned up until mid-year, they're put on hold for the moment. We would hope to do a number of those later on in the year, but obviously monitoring the situation as it goes on. But the one-to-one support work, we're very much there for you to help you with that. So if you don't know who your MA is or your market advisor, they haven't been in touch, they probably have. If they haven't, do feel free to get in touch with them or come to me, Eddie Goodwin, and I can put you in touch with the right person for you. Just for info to the client companies there today, some of the stuff that we're really seeing companies utilize in this period for things like market research, product validation, also things. I mean, one of the big things for us at the moment is looking at trying to help companies look at the localization of the website. So using this period to kind of encourage, maybe it's a time to overhaul the website or take in some professional support in terms of that, which will help you then lay the groundwork then when all this is over to capitalize on. But we're also continuing to do the normal things, which is like lead generation and to support you in managing your relationships over here with your clients and to look for new ones. So message there, we're still very much open for business, albeit from our remote locations and working from home, probably similar to your own scenario there in Ireland. So on to the proceedings today. The theme of the first webinar, as you're aware, is to give the kind of business sentiment and an overview of what's happening here in business in Germany. And we're delighted to have Germany Trade and Invest who are going to speak to that, and I'll introduce them in a minute. So the idea being that they at the coalface can give a view from the German side in terms of what they're seeing, both in terms of government, the messaging, and also from business, that they're very close to German business, so they can give some of that sentiment and feedback from German business. But also as a second part, a number of the client companies on today have operations here in Germany, so we're very conscious of that. And we're delighted to have 2 legal and tax firms that are on. They're going to be speaking today after Germany Trade and Invest, who can give that specific information in terms of the supports that are available for companies based here in the market, particularly those that have operations or a presence of some kind here. So something very practical. It's the supports here are they were very quick in terms of the response to German government, but it does a lot of this down coming from the regional, the lender level, and there's 16 of those. So there's a little bit of navigation, and today should hopefully help you work through that. In terms of format, we're going to have the 3 speakers. Torsten will speak first. We'd encourage you to type in your question as normal in there. I'll be picking those up, and after Torsten's finished his piece, I'll put some of those back out to him so you can hear the answers publicly. And then we'll do the same again after the other 2 speakers in terms of the specific supports available. So again, we'll have plenty of time for that. So just type your questions in and we'll get to as many of those as possible. That we're going to run for about an hour, so there should be plenty of time for that. So say type away, and we will afterwards, if you have specific questions, we can put you in touch with the firms that are on here today to talk to them individually about your queries. So no problem doing that, so you can have specific conversations afterwards. Just to point out, apart from the speakers today, I'm also very happy to have on Our colleagues there in the German-Irish Chamber are on the webinar today. That's Patrick Bamming, and I see Andreas Fagan is on as well. Patrick and the team there are very much involved with the German Chamber in offering similar type services of legal, tax, and professional services in relation to Germany. So a lot of this would be very relevant and right down their road as well. So it's another option to speak with them for professional advice, and they're based in Ireland. Again, that's Patrick Bamming, or let me know at the German-Irish Chamber, or say drop me a line at Eddie Goodwin, Enterprise Ireland, and I can put you directly in touch. So let's get to proceedings today. Say the first speaker, and delighted to have Thorsten Pauli. Thorsten is from Germany Trade and Invest. Thorsten is the country head for a number of countries, Ireland included, and so he's also a friend of ours. Enterprise Ireland's been involved, for those who were at the Ambition Germany event in Thomond Park late last year. Thorsten spoke at that, and he's here with us today, delighted that he can give his views on what he's hearing from the ground here in Germany. Germany Trade and Invest is the economic development agency for the Federal Republic of Germany. There are 50 offices around the world. They have a dual mandate. One of them is to help companies set up in Germany, and the other end is the outward piece of helping German companies to internationalize. So he's familiar with both sides of that. So I'll introduce the other speakers after Thorsten, and then so without any further ado, pass it over to you, Thorsten.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this webinar. I thought I would like to start with the economic impact of Corona crisis on Germany, as far as it looks now. Can we have the next slide, please? So that economic impact is very severe, it is not good, and it is very strong at the moment. The IFO Institute, which is one of the leading German research institutes, regularly has a survey about the business climate, comprising the actual situation at the moment and the expectations for the next 6 months. And that business climate index has shown an historical downturn last month. Can we have the next slide, please? So if you have a look, for example, at the manufacturing industry, which is of course very, very important to Germany, that has suffered the strongest drop since 2009, since the financial crisis. If we have a look at the index for the service industries, it is the strongest downturn since 2005. Actually, that was when the index was created, so it's been the worst so far drop. Can you have the next slide, please? And in that context, it's very important to stress that the German government has come out already 3 weeks ago, especially the Minister for Economy and the Minister for Finance, and they have stressed very clearly that the government is willing to do whatever it takes to stabilize the economy. They have introduced an unlimited relief program for Corona hit companies, including extensive short-time work. In Germany, that can last at the moment for up to a year. They have created an economic stabilization fund. They have created a special program for small businesses, freelancers, and self-employed worth 50 billion euros. They have announced additional funding for the health system of 58.5 billion euros, and I think that is also very interesting for Irish companies, given your structure. You're very strong at pharmaceuticals, at medtech, and so on, and also tax payment deferrals. And I don't really have to go into any detail because I think we will hear a lot more later. Can we have the next slide, please? I just want to stress that because Germany, of course, is a federation of 16 states, and maybe that is not known to everybody, but all the federal German states have introduced their own support schemes on top of that federal package I just mentioned. And at the moment, I mean, this develops quite dynamic, but at the moment, these measures sum up to an additional 66 billion euros. 2/3 of these 66 billion euros are actually spent in North Rhine-Westphalia and in Bavaria. But that is also available to companies in the state they are located in. Next slide, please. I think this is also important to know that actually the crisis, of course, is very severe in Germany, but the development of the public finances in the last years had been quite favorable, actually since the last crisis in 2008-9. So in Germany, we had a budget surplus constantly for the last 6 years, and that has reduced the total government debt burden in percentage of GDP from more than 80% in 2010 to below 60% last year. So actually there is room for a certain additional debt, and that debt is huge. Last week the government and the parliament agreed an additional debt of 156 billion euros because of Corona. Next slide, please. And what is also, I think, positive for the German government at the moment is that the financing conditions for bonds are quite favorable. Actually, they have a negative yield. So if the German government at the moment borrows money, they still get money for that, a negative interest rate. Next slide, please. This week, the leading German economists, the so-called Sachverständigenrat, Expertise Council, has come out with the first GDP scenario. They actually have 3 scenarios. The first and most probable scenario, according to them, would be a recession in 2020 and this year of altogether 2.8%. But an increase already next year of 3.7%. So that would mean that next year we would have totally overcome the crisis at the moment. The condition for this is that the quarantine measures, the shutdown of public life and economic activity would only last 5 weeks. If it would last longer, say 7 to 8 weeks, so maybe into the early summer, German GDP, that would be the second scenario, would decrease much more, 5.4% this year, but would still increase quite significantly next year, but not to the pre-crisis level. And the third scenario is that it would take even longer in the second half of the year, and that would mean that especially next year the increase would be only 1%, so it would take considerably longer to recover from the current drop. Next slide, please. Yes, and I would like to close with a hint on our homepage. We have made a special homepage in English, so where we compile information, especially for foreign companies connected to the Corona developments. Next slide, please. That would be it. You have my contact details. If you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to contact me also next week if you like. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Torsten. A really concise and a good overview. I'm just pulling up some of the questions here. In the meantime, one that I'd have myself is, and it's only come out of really, I think, over the last number of days, so you might not be that familiar yet with it. I think it's very recent, but the whole 2 billion support package for startups in Germany. Can you talk to that at all, that more recent initiative?
Yes, that is a special program designed, well, it's startups, yes, and it is also directed at freelancers and self-employed people, so who do not work for big established companies. This is a support measure which is administratively quite easy to get. However, it is well, it can be, there can be a subsidy, and there can be a credit with a very favorable interest rate and borrowing conditions. People have to apply in all the German states at the state institutions. So actually, there can be another institution in Berlin being responsible for the handling of these package than, let's say, in Bavaria or wherever.
Okay, very good. A couple more here. Is that 5 weeks? When you say 5 weeks, is that from the 30th of March or from when?
I think from mid-March. When were the measures introduced? I think 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so mid-March.
It would be end of April, I would say. Okay.
All right. I think that clarifies that. Mark, if that doesn't, just type in again and we'll get you some more on that. I have one from Tom. Tom, yes, the slide deck will be circulated afterwards. Torsten, I presume you're okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, we'll get that around to everyone afterwards. Fiona mentions here, any forecast information on how the crisis will affect public spending budgets for Irish companies who sell in the German municipalities, for example?
I think this we will have in more detail, I think, in the next presentations to come. But it is very different depending on the place you are at. So as I said, I mean, the German states have their own supporting institutions, maybe banks or other institutions. And so one needs to look where one is located.
Yeah, okay. We might come back to that then, and the second piece is right. And you want to just, if you want to any more clarification, just come in on that again in the second piece. Somebody's asked here as well. Also, any plans for the German government to provide financial support for their airports? Interesting one.
Airports?
Yeah.
Not that I know of.
Yeah, they'll all probably materialize.
Maybe I don't know.
There's a lot of talk today about Lufthansa and the big bailout there, so I think it's probably starting with the airlines.
Yes.
Well, the question is just about airports, but I think do you want to just go on airlines?
Yeah, airlines, they have already said that they will use short work extensively, and airports probably too, because there's no traffic.
I think this is Jürgen. When I also say a word to this, as far as I know, that especially the airlines and the airports, those are also covered by the normal measures that are valid for all other companies. So, for example, as you just mentioned, Lufthansa has put more than 80,000 employees into short-time work. That's as an example.
So, okay, yeah, I think that is maybe interesting. Every fourth German manufacturing company intends to use that measure. So that will be very many employees.
Okay, there's a question here, and it's probably a more general one, maybe difficult to answer, but there's business obviously been missing now, but when we get back to normal business, when that kicks in, is it fair to say that it'll be able to kick in without too much of an aftermath? I mean, that's a difficult one to answer, but I mean, I suppose the question is, how quickly can German business get back to full speed, do you think?
Well, if it's the best scenario, which is considered to be the most probable, that was, I think, on Tuesday published, that will be already next year. We will be to a higher economic activity than before the crisis.
Yeah. Okay.
But that, of course, it depends. It really depends, I think, on how long the measures in Germany take place, and also, of course, because Germany, like Ireland, is extremely export-minded. It also depends on the foreign markets. So that is very difficult, I think, at the moment to predict.
Yeah. Okay. We should just clarify with people if they're not aware that production is pretty much ongoing in Germany. There's small pockets of certain industries that are on stop, but on the whole, German production is certainly, and deliveries, etc., are all still ongoing. Okay, listen, thank you very much for that, Torsten. We'll move to the second part of the presentation. Say people can go back with any questions. We'll send around Torsten's slides after as well with his contact details. So now moving over to the second part of it and the first presentation of that, which is Jürgen Helmholtz and Daniel Pott from Schnorbus Helmholtz Wardemann, a firm that is a legal tax business services firm, professional services firm based here in Nord Rhine-Westfalen, which is, if you don't know, one of the most populated and biggest business lender in Germany. And so Jürgen and his team have worked with a number of Irish companies to set up operations over here, so are familiar with both sides and both jurisdictions. So Jürgen and Daniel are going to talk particularly not just about this lender here, because they say the supports are quite individual in terms of lender, but we've kind of divided Germany north and south, and they're looking at kind of the north and western area. So delighted to have Jürgen and Daniel here, and pass it over to you.
Okay, Eddie, thanks for your introduction. Hello to everybody. Maybe you're a little bit surprised that we do it with two people, but that's also part of the Corona crisis. We work in a two shift in our office, and in case that Daniel or I have to go into quarantine within the next 10 minutes, the other one can finalize our presentation. But that's just a joke. So we will go ahead and speed up with our presentation. Maybe you can change the slide to number 2. What is missing at the lower end is we have can you scroll down a little bit, because there's one information. You see. So we try to find out links in the internet to information that are available in English language, and you find this information at the bottom of the slides. Though unfortunately there are just a few ministries which are providing information in English language. As far as we could find them, we have listed them here in our presentation. So what we would like to do now in the following 10 or 15 minutes is to provide you with some information, as Eddie just said, about the multi-billion euro assistance programs, meaning subsidies to the companies and loan programs. We would like to introduce to you some tax-related assistance, and we would like to introduce to you how the German government would like to safeguard the jobs. The law amendments will come later by Simon in this presentation. Next, please. Let's start with the most important thing, which is the short-time work allowance. The short-time work allowance can be applied by companies in case that they would like to have more than 10% of the employees going into short-time work. The reduction of the working time needs to be more than 10% of the regular working time. That means that a company can either say that a department can use short-time work, or they can decide that the entire company goes into short-time work. And how much will be the subsidy that is granted? In case that an employee has no children, he can receive 60% of his monthly net pay. And in case that the employee has children, he can ask for 67% of the net pay. Of course, this short-term time work allowance can be increased by the employer. That means that the employer can do this on an individual basis, and he increases the salary. The increase has no impact on the allowance itself. What is also quite important is that there is a complete reimbursement of Social Security contributions that the employer pays to the Social Security authorities. That means that the part of the employee has to be transmitted to the authorities, but not the employer's part. I believe it's good to see an example how this will work. You see that I've chosen an employee. He is a single. That means that he has no child. The reduction of working time will be 50%. The original gross is 2,500 euro and the monthly net is 1,800 euro. Now the new gross, due to the 50% reduction, is reduced to 1,250 euro, which equals a net amount of 950 euro. That means that the difference in the net amount is 850 euro. It's simply 1,800 minus 950. So in case that this employee is now in the short-time work period, he is entitled to get a net remuneration of 950 euro plus a short-time working allowance of 510 euro. That's 850 euro, the difference explained above, times 60%. So his total net salary will be 1,460 euro in comparison to 1,800. It's of course less, but I think it's maybe not so dramatic. That's the most important information that I would like to give you in this regard. Next, please. Next slide, please. Hello, next slide. Okay. We do a lot of work for international companies, and we always are asked how to apply for this short-time work, because it's quite important that the company does everything correct. Otherwise, the company will not get this allowance. So how to apply for this allowance? First, you have to discuss this with your employees. You need to introduce the short-time work in the company. You have to discuss with the people the extent of the reduction and the time for which this short-time work shall apply. In the second step, you have to do an agreement with each single employee, or in case that the company has a works council, the agreement has to be done with the works council. In the next step, the company has to notify the local employment agency about the short-time work. That's a formal act, and the company needs to fill in the notification, the Anzeige, absolutely correctly. Otherwise, it might be possible that the company will not get any allowance. The employment agency will, in the next step, approve this notification. And finally, in the payroll system, the calculation and payment has to be done. And it's quite important that the company cannot just say that it makes a reduction, for example, of a lump sum 20%. The reduction needs to be calculated on a calendar day basis and needs to be also considered in the payroll system on a calendar day basis. That's quite important to know. And finally, the application for reimbursement has to be transmitted to the employment agency. That's an automatic process that is normally done together with the filing of the monthly payroll. That means also that in the first instance, the employer has to pay the short-time work allowance, and in the second step, he gets the reimbursement from the employment agency. So next, please. And now I pass to Daniel.
Thank you, Jürgen, and good afternoon from my side as well to everybody. With the short-time working allowance described by Jürgen, companies affected by the COVID-19 virus can reduce personal costs. However, in an awful lot of companies, this will not be enough to compensate for the loss of the sales and to cover the remaining ongoing operating costs. The German government has therefore set up assistance programs to support the liquidity of the companies. Support is provided in the form of direct non-repayable grants on the one hand, and in form of state guarantees for loans granted on the other hand. We are now if you look at the slide of the presentation here, you can see the German government's Corona Immediate Assistance Program. Only small businesses, freelancers, and the self-employed are eligible for direct runoff grants. Since last Friday, these entitled persons are able to apply for a subsidy via an online form. The amount of the subsidy depends on the number of the employees. The federal government grants 9,000 euros for self-employed persons and companies with up to 5 employees, and 15,000 euros for those with up to 10 employees. Due to the federal structure of Germany, the application and payment is administered by the individual federal states. So some of the federal states have further increased the federal subsidies. The bar charts here in this slide illustrate examples of subsidy amounts applicable in the states of North Rhine-Westphalia on the left side, Berlin in the middle, and Hessen on the right side. These states also grant subsidies for self-employed persons and companies with up to 50 employees. And in North Rhine-Westphalia, this amounts to 25,000 euros. In Berlin, 15,000 euros. It's the same as for persons with up to 10 employees. And in Hesse, 30,000 euros in case the applicant has up to 50 employees. But what are the conditions for the grant of the subsidy in detail? So we have to look at the next page of the presentation. So on the top left corner, you can see that eligible are generally commercial and non-profit enterprises, self-employed persons, and members of the liberal professions, including artists. Each of them have to be registered with the German tax office and have to have their business seat in Germany. And they have to be active on the German market already for a longer time. At least they have to have offered goods and services at least before 31st December 2019. Important to know is that not eligible for the subsidy are subsidiaries of other companies, which means that subsidiaries that other companies have a shareholding of more than 50% in a subsidiary, then these subsidiaries are not eligible for the funding. Furthermore, important to know is that the subsidy will be taxed as business income at the end of the year. So, but it is not subject to VAT. The applicant has to give an affirmation that he is in an economic situation threatening his existence due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The existence of an economic situation threatening his existence is interpreted differently by the individual federal states. So, but in general, however, a liquidity bottleneck, of course, is assumed. So that means that the continuous income from the applicant's business operations is expected not to be sufficient to pay the due payment obligations in the 3 months following the application. So the subsidy we talk about here is meant for the 3 months following, or for the 3 months April, May, and June. So everybody at the moment is expecting that the shutdown will be over after that, which we all hope, of course. You can find the application forms here in the link at the bottom again of this slide. In this PDF file, there are links to every competent office of the federal states where relevant business here is seated. In addition to these direct grants, further programs have been set up to facilitate access to loans for companies of all sizes. And in this context, the federal government has currently provided about 400 billion for guarantees. We already heard that in the first speaker. The number of loan programs set up at federal and state level is almost unmanageable. If we now move forward to the next slide of the presentation, you will see two links again at the bottom here. In the left link, you can access popular programs of the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau, KfW. They are more presented in more detail here on the slide also. But the link on the right-hand side, provides access to a database of all existing funding opportunities. I'm not kidding, if you search for funding opportunities here with the keyword Corona, you will get 153 hits. It is therefore impossible to give a halfway complete overview of the funding programs at this point. Furthermore, here it is important to note that companies have to contact their own house bank in order to apply for subsidized loans. The house bank can then access the KfW's funds, for example. Here on this slide, we present a selection of the KfW loan conditions applicable to small and medium-sized enterprises within the definition of the EU. On the occasion of the COVID-19 crisis, the KfW Special Program 2020 was launched. Small and medium-sized enterprises can take out loans for working capital, with 90% of the loan amount being secured by state guarantees. In the case of larger companies, 80% is secured. The interest rates range between 1% and 1.46% for small and medium-sized enterprises, and between 2% and 2.12% for larger companies. The application process is simplified due to the crisis, and it is accelerated because the KfW itself does not carry out any risk assessment for loans up to 3 million euros. Only the house bank of the company does the risk assessment. Unfortunately, I have to say that we often hear in practice that the house banks still require companies to provide proof of their creditworthiness, as it was before the crisis. And sometimes personal guarantees are even requested from the entrepreneurs, and for 100% of the loan amount, although the house bank itself is only liable for 10% of the loan. Then for large companies, the already existing loan programs have been extended, and the access requirements have been eased. We see this on the next slide of the presentation.
Daniel, one second. Eddie, how much time do we have?
Yeah, we'll need to kind of wrap it up pretty soon there, because there's some questions coming through.
Maybe we can skip this, Daniel, because maybe that's not so important for.
Yes, I'm not sure who of the auditors here is would fall under these loans here. These are really the large companies, so we can skip this. Yeah, of course.
Okay, on to the next one, and then maybe in the next minute or two, if you could finish up there, and we'll leave some time for the next presentation.
So let me finalize.
No, let me just summarize.
Sorry, Daniel.
That the conditions for state-supported financing, they have been eased overall, but however, the practical utilization is still difficult due to an unmanageable variety of programs, and because of the still restrictive approach of the house banks. And so now I would like to hand over back to Jürgen, and he will finish this up. Thank you.
Eddie, I will do it in 2 minutes. Thanks, Daniel. So some last words in respect to the tax area. At the moment, tax office are very generous if you ask for a reduction or for deferral, whatever. So in general, tax authorities will grant tax payment deferrals, and that means that this can be applied for the current prepayments for 2020, as well as liabilities resulting from prior years. They will not refund taxes for prior years that are already paid. The only possibility is when you now receive a tax assessment notice, for example, for 2019, that this liability can be deferred. You can also ask for a reduction of tax prepayments for 2020 that can be either reduced or maybe adjusted to 0, depending on your personal situation. Also important is to know that the enforcement measures and late payment penalties will be suspended for the near future. Don't ask me for what period. I would say at least until summer or even to autumn term. And the VAT prepayment extension, that's also an important point for 2020, can be adjusted to 0. That might be an important amount, but this is just available in North Rhine-Westphalia, in Hessen, in Bavaria, and in Baden-Württemberg. And finally, there is a possibility of a complete reimbursement of Social Security contributions, but please note that this is not applicable in case that you have asked for a short-time work allowance. Next, please. Next slide.
Okay, Jürgen, we need to wrap it up there.
Okay. So maybe last sentence to this. You can either do the application in an informal way. There are partly samples available, but my recommendation is to do it in an informal letter to explain your situation and to describe your situation, why you are applying for a reduction or deferral or whatever. Okay, maybe the last slide that you see who we are. You see those are we two, Daniel and me, and there are other information about our company and how to get in contact with us. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Jürgen and Daniel. A lot of complex information in a short time frame there. So thank you for that. We can share, and there's a question in here from Rory. Yes, certainly we'll share all presentations afterwards and all the contact details of the speakers. Thank you guys for that. So now on to the final presentation. Simon Gear from MHL Law, a Munich-based law legal firm that also have operations in Dublin, work with a number of companies here. Simon, I'll pass it over to you. If you could keep it to underneath the 10 minutes, please, so we have a little bit of time for questions that I can direct to you.
Okay, I'll do my very best. So thank you, Eddie, and hi everyone also from me. And thank you very much for being here today. I hope that I can answer some of your questions, and of course I will be available for further questions afterwards if we still have time. First of all, next slide please, Patrick. First of all, I'd like to say a few words about the support provided by the Bavarian state government, which takes place in various ways. Then I'd like to give you some information on some subjects of labor law. I selected some questions which in my view should be of considerable interest to you as an employer. Finally, I will discuss a few other special legal regulations in connection with the corona crisis, which may also affect you at least partially. Next slide, please, Patrick. So let's start with the local support in Bavaria, which essentially is provided by two measures. On the one hand, a so-called protective umbrella that is guaranteed by loans and guarantees, and then there is also an emergency aid program for Bavarian companies or businesses. On the other hand, that is designed independently of the federal government aid program, and it was Germany's first program. Regarding loans and guarantees, there are different possibilities in Bavaria which you can fall back on as a company. First of all, there is of course the support of the KfW, the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau, However, Jürgen has already explained this so far, so that I will refrain from making further comments on this at this point. In addition, however, there is a separate support program of the LFA Förderbank in Bavaria. There are various possibilities of support. In particular, it is possible to finance operating resources or to reschedule debts. Short-term liabilities can also be financed by this program. In addition, the loan program can be combined with liability exemptions, which relieve the house banks of default risks and thus facilitate the granting of loans. The best way to deal with this will probably be discussing it with your bank directly, as details mainly depend on the circumstances of the particular case. In addition, there are various possibilities of guarantees. On the one hand, again, with the LFA Förderbank Bayern, which issues default guarantees for loans to medium-sized companies and freelancers. In particular, this issues the guarantee of loans for operating resources, which could otherwise not be granted due to a lack of other securities, and amounts up to 30 million euros. In contrast to this, there are separate guarantee programs for certain sectors, such as gardening, landscaping, hotels, restaurants, trade, commerce, and stuff like that, at Bürgschaftsbank Bayern GmbH, which has a guarantee ceiling of 2.5 million euro in these sectors and a maximum guarantee rate for operating resources financing of 80%. Next slide, please. So let me now say a little bit more about the emergency aid program in Bavaria itself, which Jürgen has already mentioned for other federal states and also for the Federal Republic of Germany. All these programs run parallel to each other, but they differ in the amount of support provided by each government, in the application procedure, and also in the basic conditions. I've briefly compared the differences between the nationwide program and the Bavarian way. The basic conditions are pretty much the same, but there are big differences in the size of the company. While the federal program only supports companies with up to 10 employees, you can also count on support from the government in Bavaria for medium-sized companies up to 250 employees. Up to 250 employees, you can apply for up to 50,000 euros as an emergency aid in Bavaria, and it's important in this context, again, that the emergency aid does not have to be paid back, apart from the case that the government subsequently finds out that you have applied for this aid wrongly. Regarding the number of employees, I have outlined on the slide the conversion key for part-time and marginal employees so that everyone can estimate whether for his company the application for an emergency aid is possible or not. Please note, in addition, of course, that you must have your registered office in Bavaria for this Bavarian emergency aid program, and it's also important to note that the application process for federal support in Bavaria is the responsibility of the federal state of Bavaria. So in Bavaria, this procedure runs parallel online on one web page where you have to decide which aid program you want to apply for in case both programs are possible for your company. And please be also aware that you should make the application as soon as possible, because there are deadlines for both the federal funds and the state funds in Bavaria to consider. If both the Bavarian and the nationwide program are to be considered, the Bavarian program will generally take second place, but this does not apply, however, if the Bavarian program is more favorable for the applicant. This might be in particular if the company has more than 10 employees, since in this case no more support by the federal program takes place. However, you can, for example, not apply for 15,000 euros from the Federal Republic as well as from Bavaria with, for example, 8 employees. In this case, it's only possible at the federal government. Please also note that you can make several applications up to the total limit if you didn't get the total at the maximum limit on your first application. Next slide, please. I brought you a screenshot on which you can see the link for the federal program as well as for the Bavarian state program, at least if your company is in Bavaria. As you can see, you have to indicate at the beginning of the application form how many employees are employed by your company and to what extent. The program will then automatically determine for which programs you qualify, and we would of course be happy to assist you with the application if requested, as this is all in German. Next slide, please. Let me now come to the labor law issues. I've tried to pick out the most important questions from my point of view, which I assume to be particularly interesting for you as an employer. The first question is whether you can send your employees to the home office or not. This can unfortunately not be answered with yes or no, but it depends on what you have agreed with your employee in the employment contract. There is already home office as place of work, then this is of course possible in an uncomplicated way. If not, unilateral employer's instruction regarding the place of work is not possible without the employee's consent. Also, you cannot force your employee to take his or her holiday against his or her will. Of course, you're always free to make arrangements with the employee, what I prefer generally, which should be possible, especially in view of the crisis, but you cannot force them against their will. Same applies if your employee has a working time account. You also cannot force him or her to build up negative hours. Exceptions to this can, of course, be made in an employment contract, company agreement, or collective agreements. Unfortunately, the effects of closing down your business due to an official order are at the company's expense. This risk also includes the salaries, so that these are basically still to be paid. It must be said that there is, of course, no further jurisdiction on the Corona case itself. With regard to the salaries, please also refer to the comments of Jürgen on short-time work. The situation is different if an employee has to be in quarantine due to an official order. In this case, but only in this case, you as employer have to pay the salaries in advance, but there is a possibility that you will be reimbursed for these costs according to the infection protection law, Infektionsschutzgesetz, as it's called in Germany. Next slide, please. Whether your employee may stay at home if a child is ill or if a child is to be cared for, you need to know in this context that this should be possible for a few days in general, if the employee can prove that there really was no other possibility for him. This legal provision is, however, excluded in many employment contracts. Therefore, also here it depends on the individual case. If the legal regulation is excluded in the employment contract, then the employee has only the possibility to take annual leave or to talk to you, which I'd propose to do. Terminations in connection with Corona also depend, first of all, on the size of your company. You're generally relatively free to terminate if your company has up to 10 employees. I know that the dismissal procedure in Germany is very different compared to Irish procedure. In Germany, you have to say that there is basically no entitlement to a redundancy payment. This applies especially to terminations in small companies, as mentioned before. But as an employee, you always have the possibility to take legal action, but the chances of success for employees are, however, very low as long as it's a small company. This changes remarkably.
Simon, sorry to cut over. Can we, we'll need to wrap it up there just to, because some of these questions will come to you as well. Do you want to just, is there a final piece you want to say there?
No, I think we can start with the questions if you prefer.
Okay, super. There's one here that probably crosses, that's in a number of people's minds on the call, is about, this one here is from Angus. So are there supports available for German citizens employed by an Irish company? 100% of the employees' time is spent in Germany. So that's to the nub of it. Which companies does it have to be a GmbH, a limited company over here, to get the supports?
Depends on which kind of support you're talking about.
I think you talk about this, Angus, he's talking about the short-time work allowance. So normally you need to have a permanent establishment in the meaning of the Social Security law in Germany. We did not apply for Irish companies. We tried to apply for the allowance for a lot of Belgian companies, and we are faced by this problem. So normally at the moment, according to my understanding, foreign employers are not entitled to get the allowance. I have heard from other countries, especially from France and Luxembourg, that they have changed the law, that they now allow also foreign employers to apply for this allowance. We have to check this situation and maybe it will change. But at the moment, unfortunately, there might be no allowance for foreign employers.
Okay, and just to confirm, that was Angus. I confirmed that's what it was. It was about the Kurd site. So that I think that answered the question well. Thank you, Jürgen. So, a question for Simon. We use agents in Germany and pay a retainer each month as they cannot travel to meet customers. As a result, legally, can we suspend the payments or reduce the amount we pay them?
So, sorry, I didn't understand it correctly. What? Can you repeat the question?
Okay, we use agents in Germany and pay a retainer each month as because they cannot travel to meet customers at the moment. Can we suspend the payments or reduce the amount we pay them? So that'll be agents as opposed to full employees.
That depends on whether they are socially secured in Germany. It depends on the circumstances of the particular case. Do they pay social security in Germany?
Mark, you might come back and clarify that. The question, he says yes.
So if you're socially secured in Germany, you generally qualify for Kurzarbeitergeld. Yes.
Okay, so look, that's maybe a very specific one that we can put you, Mark, we can put you in touch directly with Simon afterwards, and you can take it up with him. I think is probably the best thing there. So I think that's probably where we're just at the time up now. There is a question here for Torsten, which is a kind of a longer one in terms of index and consumer spending. Again, okay. I think what we'll do is we'll put that on to you afterwards as well, Torsten. So I'm just conscious we're just on the time. So I say this has been hopefully useful for all the companies that were on today. We're delighted and really thankful for the speakers. So for Torsten, Jürgen, for Daniel and Simon for coming up and giving up their time today to answer the questions. I think what the idea of these seminars or webinars is that they give a flavor and a connection that you can talk to the people afterwards specifically about your idea. So again, come to us. We'll share the slides afterwards. Come to us and we'll happily introduce you to the people there and to be able to give their expert opinions on it. So we'll leave it at that today. Again, thank you. Thanks to my own colleagues as well, particularly Patrick and to Roisin. We're going to come back. Keep an eye on what we send. Next week's webinar is going to be about supply chain impact on German companies. So I think a really good and interesting topic for the times we're in, and we're going to have some great speakers for that as well. So we'll leave it there. Thank you very much to everybody, and stay safe in the period that we're in at the moment. All the best. Thank you.